Hey there, guys. Thanks so much for joining me, and a very warm welcome to another Holy Shed. And you know what? It's nearly Easter. Hurrah! A couple of weeks to go now, and not only is this, well, the most important day in the Christian calendar, it's also a time of the year when you just feel, oh gosh, we've made it. We've got round the corner. Those dark grey days of January, February, March that just seem to go on forever are behind us. And I think some of us can't quite believe how much sunshine we've been having lately. And lots more to come, we hope. It's great, isn't it? Now then, for the past few weeks, we have been pondering themes and ideas raised by my book, The Post-Evangelical, the first book I ever wrote, which celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. We're nearly at the end of this series, which, I've enjoyed doing a great deal. But now, just another week to go, I guess. 30 years. 30 years is a long time. Everyone changes in 30 years, right? Most of us quite a lot. And yet, in other ways, maybe not so much. I've changed for sure, though I probably prefer to think of it as evolving. But you know what? Reading the Post-Evangelical from cover to cover over these past few weeks, for the first time, literally in 30 years, I've been amazed at how much of it still rings true for me. Not all of it, I have to say, but a surprising amount is still pretty much on the nail of where I'm at today, which is a pleasant surprise. So in this session, we are going to be focusing on chapter 9, which is called Positively Worldly. It's a chapter which contains elements that I would certainly revise, at least if I had the chance, if I were writing it again today, especially the stuff in there about sin and the fall. It's a section where I'm pondering the ambiguities of human life and nature, how we sometimes shine in God's image and other times not so much. The fact of such ambiguity is, of course, beyond question. It's everywhere, all around us. It's within our own lives too. But I no longer understand this in terms of a fall from grace. And it's worth underlining that the term fall never appears in the text. Indeed, neither does the word sin. These words and ideas are read into Genesis 3 from later Christian theology. And in fact, Jews, it's the Hebrew scriptures, and Jews know absolutely nothing about a fall in their theology, much less in the chapters of Genesis. These days, I'm much happier to see human ambiguity as a consequence of us being moral beings, moral creatures with the capacity to decide between what's right and what's wrong and to make choices either way. I read Genesis 3 as a wonderful mythical or poetic way of imagining how we became moral beings. I've talked about all of this in Black Sheep and Prodigals, chapter 6, which I called I Believe in Original Goodness. We enter the world in a state of grace. And so, you know, if you want to check it out more, you could look at it there. And by the way, I hope I don't need to repeat that when I say mythical, I don't mean untrue. I'm not degrading the text at all. I'm really thinking of it being true in a different way. It's a different approach to truth that we may find, the kind of approach to truth we may find in poetry, say, rather than in scientific fact. So in the context of this beautiful mythical narrative, Eve, I would say, had the courage. That's how I would read it. She's often seen as being, the baddie of the piece. And that's become a basis for an awful lot of misogyny over the years. But I don't see it that way. I see Eve as having the courage to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because, without that, we would have remained in so-called innocence, or we'd be amoral, not really properly or fully human. It was necessary to experience the knowledge of good and evil in order to become moral creatures with the capacity to discern for ourselves what's right and wrong without, just living according to a command from God or rules. But we're then able to make choices about what is good and evil. And I think you'd agree, it's inconceivable that we could be in that position. Eve had to do what she did, whichever way you want to interpret it. In scientific terms, post-Darwin, we now know, of course, that humans never were in a perfect state from which we fell. We're mortal creatures on this magnificent journey stretching back billions of years. We never fell from a flawless state or condition. Rather, we've risen. We've arisen through the wonder of evolution to become moral agents with the breathtaking capacity to make good choices or to screw up the whole thing big time. And I love the story in Genesis, but I love it as a poetic way of grappling with this reality of how did we arrive at this place, we could come back to all of that on another occasion if you liked. But my real reason for writing chapter 9 in the Post-Evangelical was to challenge the negative view of the world that many of us grew up with in evangelical churches. I was taught to avoid worldliness. That was the big word, worldliness. I was to avoid worldliness at all costs, which I have to confess, worldliness seemed to incorporate most of the things that I liked, the things that I found attractive or interesting or fun. We should live as aliens in the world, I was told. So we need to shun the world, setting our sights instead on things heavenly. Well, to be honest, I had not the foggiest clue what heavenly meant in any kind of rational or practical terms. How could we? We live in this world. I just knew, because I was told, that indulging in so-called worldly pleasures, which, as I say, seemed to be most of the things I found appealing, was really bad and could land me in hell. But of course, the design fault with all of this is that we are worldly creatures, both by nature and also by God's creation. We are worldly. It's normal, and I'd say spiritual in the best sense, to find much in the world to enjoy. I think that's how it's supposed to be. I feel daft for even saying this. And this is why we end up with a Christianized version of worldly things, in order to still enjoy worldly stuff, but it's sanitized so we don't feel guilty and we're not afraid it's going to drive us to hell. It's what I called in the book Christian alternativism, a whole subculture of alternative versions of what we're supposed to avoid out in their worldly versions. In the mid-1990s, when I wrote the book, the evangelical subculture appeared to me to be an overdrive, creating this whole industry of Christian alternatives to things in the wider culture. Christian music, Christian gigs, Christian publishers, Christian dating agencies, Christian social events, Christian holidays, Christian comedy, Christian TV and radio and theatre, Christian literature, even Christian sci-fi in books like the Left Behind series. Part of the reason, looking back, that people came to Holy Joe's back there in the 90s was to get away from all of this, so that they could just enjoy music, full stop, wherever it came from, to enjoy books and art and literature, etc., without it needing to have a Christian label on it. And I have to say, for the most part, the Christian versions were deemed, and still are by many people, to basically just be not as good. And so they came to Holy Joe's to ditch all that fear of being worldly and to get away from the theological dualism that undergirds all of that Christian alternativism. By theological dualism, what I'm talking about is something which has actually dogged the Christian community pretty much from day one, certainly from the early days. I'm talking about a split view of reality, with one side good and of God and the other side bad of the devil, which results in a kind of paranoia that anything outside of this Christian bubble is inherently bad and likely to seduce us away from God and God's ways into the devil's domain. As I say, there's nothing new about this. Throughout church history, from Clement of Alexandria and Origen through Augustine and down to the present day, a Gnostic dualism between the material on the one hand and the spiritual on the other, between body and spirit, between the sacred and the secular, has characterized much, maybe most, of Christian spirituality. The outcome has been a mistrust of the body and bodily desires, and a sense of dislocation from the wider world and even the physical realm of nature, which, however beautiful it may be, we're told is one day going to burn and be destroyed. We need to save souls, not nature. Somebody once told me when I was talking at some event or other about climate change and caring for creation. So the spiritual journey in that scenario becomes one of rising up. It's a spirituality of ascent, of rising above, transcending nature and the natural physical world in order to meet God in this supra, spiritual realm outside and beyond the material world. The safe thing then, of course, is to avoid worldly pursuits. Be in the world but not of it. We've heard that, I'm sure, plenty of times in the past. Stay as much as possible within this Christian evangelical bubble. Well, let's just stick a pin in all of that for a moment, because I need to say something about this in but not of thing, which isn't a biblical phrase, by the way. It's assumed that it is in the Bible. It isn't. And it just needs another word or two, because the fact of the matter is the Bible does sometimes use the word world. It speaks about the world in negative terms. For example, in Paul's letter to the Romans, in chapter 12 of Romans, Paul exhorts his readers, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may be able to discern what is the will of God. So here's the thing. Places in the Bible, in the New Testament, where world is used in this way have got nothing to do with the idea of living in a Christian bubble or being wary of anything, not specifically Christian. In this context, world is used to describe patterns of life and behavior which are incongruent with following Christ. I'm talking about things like greed and violence and abuse of people. And when these are incorporated into the systems of society, then world takes on a meaning all of its own. So racism is a good example of this. So to be completely up to date is toxic masculinity and misogyny or egoism or bullying and aggression and all of these kind of behaviors and attitudes. When we're surrounded by these things in the world and they're embedded in a culture that we're a part of, it's all too easy, maybe even passively, to succumb to these things, to become sullied by them or even entangled in them. And so we might legitimately read Romans chapter 12, verse 2 as something like this. Do not allow yourself to be squeezed into the mold of attitudes and behaviors contrary to Christ. Be transformed or have a different mentality. Be renewed. Enter the greater mind so that you'll understand, what is the will of God, but also what it is that you sense is how you ought to be in the world. Worldly in this sense is about attitudes and behavior that oppose human flourishing, that oppose the flourishing of all creation. To me, some of the most troubling dualism, however, surfaces in the whole us and them kind of mentality, in, out, and that kind of categorization. Believers and unbelievers, the saved and the unsaved, those bound for heaven and those bound for hell. So far as I can see, the world just isn't like that. Those categories don't work. Differences among people are more complex than that. The central point of my book, How to Be a Bad Christian, was posed in the first chapter, where I said, what if we think of the word Christian as a verb instead of a noun, as a way of being in the world instead of a badge that we wear, as a way of life instead of a list of beliefs? Or what if we see Christianity as a spiritual practice rather than joining this club and signing up to these beliefs, where it actually means seeking to live the Jesus way? What if that's what it's all about? Seems to me like that's what it is. Jesus never asked anyone to change religion, to join up to any organization, or to believe these 4 or 6 or 10 things. He never asked anyone to affirm a particular doctrine about God or heaven or even about himself. He called people to follow him, to live in particular ways. Love your neighbor, stop judging people, seek peace, forgive your sister or your brother 70 times 7, treat people how you would wish to be treated, and so on. He said, actually, of a pagan man, the Roman centurion, that he, as an outsider to the Jewish world that Jesus was a part of, that he had greater faith than he had found anywhere in all Israel, So it's not to do with, are you a part of this nation or a part of this church or a part of this society? It's who we are as people on the inside, whatever label we wear. If we look at the whole world of faith in this way, then I think it all becomes different. Everything becomes different. Faith is just far more complicated than Christian and non-Christian. People can wear the badge and be very un-Christ-like, right? I mean, people can be atheists, agnostics, members of other faiths, or whatever, and yet truly live in what we would see as the Spirit of Jesus Christ. It just doesn't work to say, you're in this club or you're outside of it. So I'll tell you what, here's something you could do. Good exercise. I recommend you go to BBC Sounds and listen to the recent Desert Island Discs. The recent one, which was with the foreign correspondent Lindsay Hilsum. She works for Channel 4, I think now, who covered events around the world, including the genocide in Rwanda and the war in Iraq. We listened to it this weekend while we were driving to our daughters, and I nearly had to stop the car because I was really on the edge of tears. I was so moved by this woman and her story, but more than all that, the heart that you felt in this woman, this amazing, lovely human being, and beautiful people that she met along the way. And yet she grew up in a non-religious home. I think she said that her mother was a Jew and her father was a chapel man, but neither of them pursued that at all. And she sort of tells humorously, really, that she says at the age of 8, rather precociously, in the car of her friend, driven by a friend's dad, and the sort of family were there, and she said, she rather precociously said at 8 years old, I don't believe in God. And the father of her friend who was driving the car was outraged and said, I won't have people speaking in that way in my car. But she was, she'd been, and I guess she still hasn't, after decades, found a reason to reverse that belief. But oh my God, what a woman, of whom I'm sure God is very pleased and proud. So I recommend you read that, because her story, but particularly who she is as a person, sort of undergirds a lot of what I'm saying here today. It's not about world or church. It's not about Christian and non-Christian, but about who we are as people, about where we find beauty and goodness and love in the world. And I, for one, sometimes find these things to be much more present and evident, out there in the world, or in just lovely, decent, proper human beings, than I find them in the whole world of religion. So what I called positively worldly constitutes a vision of the world which is based on a theology of God's Spirit, a generous theology of God's Spirit being at the very core of things, at the very center of the world, the source of goodness and beauty and love, wherever it's found, in whatever community, wherever it is, where we find love, where we find beauty, where we find goodness, there we're encountering the Spirit of God. So it's far more complex than any kind of crude dualism of us and them and all that kind of stuff. I mean, just consider for a moment the parable in the Gospels that Jesus told about the weeds and the wheat, or the wheat and the tares into authorized version language. It's in Matthew 13. It's a story which basically says that the kingdom of God is much more complicated than wheat over here and weeds over there that you can just sort of separate out. Like some church people, the workers in the story wanted to jump in there and separate the two. They wanted to have these categories. They wanted to live with, couldn't live with this mess. We want to know, where are the Christians and where are the non-Christians? Where's the weeds and where's the wheat? And the farmer said, no. If you do that, you'll make a whole mess of the entire thing. Wheat and weeds are mixed together. Let them be, and then the truth will out. I mean, hey, there are so many weeds in the church. That's not a comment on the menfolk, by the way. There are so many weeds in the church, so much wheat in the wider world. The horrible serial abuser, John Smith, that we've heard so much about in the Church of England, he was seen as a bona fide evangelical Christian. Many evangelical leaders, well, they sent him out, to take the good news to Africa because he kind of screwed up here. And I mean, a lot of church leaders defended him or covered his appalling, shocking abuse. And I'm sure in their minds they were doing this for the sake of the gospel. I mean, God help us. If that's what the sake of the gospel is, get out of here. But it's not just someone like him. It's all over them, because we ourselves, we're all a bundle of contradictions, one way or another, right? And often we could learn a great deal from honest to goodness non-believers. I mean, really. Meanwhile, what I wanted to say in the chapter could be summed up in these wonderful words from Isaiah, where it says, it's the angels actually in Isaiah 6 declare in the presence of God, the whole earth is full of God's glory. The whole earth is full of God's glory. I mean, yes, there are some pretty wretched, horrible people in the world. Some, like the weeds in the story, I would love to sort of pull up and throw on the rubbish heap myself right now. But listen, there's also so much goodness and beauty and truth in the world, so many stunningly wonderful people. So let's take hope. It's not over, not yet. We just need to keep going and not be afraid of the world, but be full participants in this world, at home in the world, at home in our bodies, at home in who we are as human beings, and not trying to imagine ourselves somewhere else. That, as I've often said, just distorts everything. When we start looking for, life elsewhere, it just distorts the whole thing, because the real issue is how we live, how we behave in this world now. That's the important thing. So I've got a prayer here, which is from my OMG book, and it's called Then I Look Again. And this prayer was written in response to and for a little girl called Lilia. There's a picture there. You may remember this little girl was stabbed to death on the streets of Boston in Lincolnshire. How can you imagine anywhere less dangerous? Well, I've never lived there, so I don't know. But Boston in Lincolnshire doesn't sound like, downtown London. And she was stabbed on the street there. So that stirred me and moved me to write this prayer, Then I Look Again. There is so much to despair about. A 9-year-old girl stabbed to death on the street of an unexceptional town for no reason, just the latest atrocity. Sometimes I wonder if you can possibly exist. Surely not the you I grew up with, the Almighty who can do anything he pleases, who intervenes or not at will and mostly doesn't. I don't believe in him. But then my eye is caught by an urban tree as old as the hills, gnarled and polluted, yet gleaming in city sunlight on a street corner, still offering shade, tirelessly transforming our mindless CO2 into life-sustaining clean air. I hear generous laughter, see 9-year-old girls playing without a care, notice a car pause needlessly to let a person cross, and a busker plays Sultans of Swing as if Knopfler himself had nothing to do that night. There are foul people in this world for sure, yet I can't help feeling hopeful that most of us prefer kindness to cruelty, aspire to do good things in life, thrive on giving love and receiving it. So all in all, looking at the world again, I honestly cannot doubt that you are here, there, everywhere. Amen. Okay, well, if you've got a drink handy, I'm going to ask you to join me in a toast in a moment. But first, I want to drink this also to a lovely woman called Sue, a solid, beautiful shedster. She's been with us from the very beginning, I think, in the Holy Shed. She's not doing too well just now. She needs our love and prayers. So I'm drinking and saying prayers for you, Sue. But a toast to the world we love, the world God so loves. A toast to springtime, for those of us up here in the northern half of the world anyway, to sunshine, blue skies, and Barbies just around the corner. A toast to everyone, of whatever faith or not, who loves the world and tries to make it better. To life, L'chaim. Okay guys, thanks so much for being with me. If you like what I'm doing here in the shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee. You just have to follow the link which is on the screen now. It's my coffee site, and we're deeply grateful for everyone who supports us in that way and in other ways too. So that's just about it for this week. And I hope that, I hope that you will be able to enjoy this week and manage to be kind to yourself, to the world. It's precious to God, to those around you, and stay human, because that's who we are. So I'm going to finish with a little benediction for you all now called Just Be. And it's about buttercups. And you know what? They're only just around the corner. Just be. Maker of beaming buttercups, of all things wild and wonderful, may we learn to stand tall, never apologizing for who we are, but glowing in the beauty and assurance that all we need to do is be.